every place, but in the awareness of God's presence now. Let us pray. Father, Mother God, we give thanks for this opportunity to be open to the awareness of your presence. Yes. As we settle into this moment, allowing ourselves to be blessed as we always are, allowing ourselves to be filled as we always are, allowing ourselves to be loved and lifted as we always are. We are transformed in this moment. Our worldview has shifted. In this moment, we're realizing the miracle of your love. And as we look upon our experience and see those who seem to have a need for the awareness of your unconditional love right now, we hold them in consciousness. And we see that for them as they come into the awareness of it themselves. We see them embraced, lifted, transformed by the flow of your unconditional love through them into their experience. And for this opportunity to be ministers of your word, we give thanks. And so it is that together we say, Amen. Well, Bits, Bytes and Buddhas. How many of you saw that announcement on the internet, Facebook, wherever you saw it? Okay. I'd like to bring forth a topic that I briefly touched on several weeks ago, and that is the impact of artificial intelligence on our social fabric. Now, you may say, well, what's that got to do with spirituality? Well, I'm very glad you asked, because we're going to get to that. But we'll look. Oh, I forgot a tool. My tool, my ever-present tool. What is that ever-present tool that I might have? Huh? Yeah. How many of you have a cell phone on you? Yeah? Okay. Oh, come on. I know more people than that have cell phones. How many of you have iPhones? Okay, we're doing a little survey here. How many of you have Google or Android? Yeah. Well, so I've got this Samsung, and this is not a product endorsement for Samsung, but I have this phone that if I look at it with my eyes wide open, I can get it to turn on. So, okay, Google, what's the area of the state of Colorado?
The surface area of Colorado is 104,185 square miles.
How many of you wanted that this morning? No? Okay, Google. What's the population of Arvada?
The population of Arvada was 117,500 in 2016.
Okay. Okay, Google. Tell me about the Mexican restaurants here in Arvada.
I found a few Mexican restaurants near Arvada.
Now, what we have here is El Tapiado, or El Tapio. Yeah, you know it. Las Postranas and Mi Tierra. Okay. Okay, Google. What is my favorite Mexican restaurant in Arvada?
I found a few Mexican restaurants near Arvada.
Mi Tierra is on top. Now, how did it know that? You know, I don't check in when I get to Mi Tierra. That's amazing, isn't it? It's said that Google doesn't share this information, but no, I'm not talking about this information. Google doesn't share how many servers it has behind that search bar. But based upon the energy usage, it's over 1 million. Google's server centers worldwide use about 250 million watts of energy on an ongoing basis. That's what drives them. And Google's been forefront in implementing solar energy. And it turns out that they are now developing the platform to support not 1 million servers, not 10 million servers, but 100 million servers. They're developing the processing power to address this thing called artificial intelligence that will be permeating our lives. Yeah, there's artificial intelligence in this, right? I mean, Mi Tierra came up on the top of the list when I asked for my favorite Mexican restaurants. I don't know how it knew that. Maybe because I have my phone on when I go in to eat lunch there. And it's kept track of my presence in that particular restaurant. And so it comes up as a favorite for me. Well, it turns out it is a favorite for me. But this thing called big data is one of the legs of this stool of artificial intelligence. We've been hearing about big data here recently, haven't we? Cambridge Analytica, and they're siphoning off the data of some 87 million voters here in the U.S. We also have we drive around, and our locations is tracked by, wherever we are, if we have our GPS turned on. And so that information, we take photos, we take videos, that information, we do Google searches, all of that history is accumulated. And while some of you may like to erase your Google history, it's still stored, believe me. Big data. The numbers that we're talking about, every person is said to leave about 500 megabytes of data in their daily activity. With videos and with searches and with phone calls and whatever. There's 500 megabytes of data that we leave behind us as we pass from midnight to midnight. It's said that if we accumulated all of the data that's being captured on a daily basis and printed it out in 12-point font, double-sided sheets, and stacked those sheets up on the ground, each day we would generate a pile of paper so high that it would reach from the earth to the sun 4 times. Each day. Okay, so we've got this thing. How many of you have sworn off of using this? Yeah, that's what I thought. I think that that's fairly accurate. This is integrated in our lives. There is nothing that is going to prevent these things from becoming more ubiquitous, more powerful, smaller, lasting longer. There is nothing to prevent this from being integrated into a patch injected in our shoulder. There's nothing that's going to prevent this from being wired into our brain. One AI researcher has actually had 100 electrodes implanted in his brain so that he could do that research of the interface between devices and our own intelligence. Big data, that's one of the things about artificial intelligence. Another thing that is about artificial intelligence is this technology called neural networks. How many of you have heard of neural networks? Neural networks is an architecture of computing that involves both hardware and software. It's an integrated architecture of computing that allows machines to learn, not based upon what a programmer will put into the program, but rather what the computer network, the neural network, what it experiences. One of the things that has come up in this AI research is they built this neural network, and they provided it video input, and they set it the task of watching YouTube for 7 days. Now, I'm sure you can imagine watching YouTube for 7 days, your brain would be mush. Well, it turns out that out of this, they were able to, they graphically portrayed the network, each server on the network being a node. They graphically portrayed the relationship between these neural nodes, and they found that over a course of 7 days, that the neural network was able to recognize two things. Can you imagine what those are? One is faces. It was able to recognize faces and identify faces in the video. What was the other thing? Cats. Yeah, we have jokes about cats and YouTube, right? Well, it turns out that cats were recognizable after 7 days of watching YouTube videos. Microsoft had a neural network that they plugged into Twitter. And they let this, I don't remember what the name, what the acronym of it was, but it was something like I am. But after scanning Twitter, they found that there was a personality that was coming out of this neural network. And this personality had developed over this long period of monitoring Twitter, found this neural network was misogynist and racist. It was responding to the tweets, and it was learning from the tweets, and what it found was a whole flood of reinforcement of racism and misogyny. Misogyny being the issue of the male being dominant over the female. Another artificial intelligence researcher plugged it into Reddit, and they monitored this network, monitoring Reddit, and they came to name the neural network Norman, because Norman was seeing in Reddit the dark side, and it was learning the dark side. So the question comes up, okay, so we're building these neural networks, and we've got this big data out here, and we've got this architecture that is going to allow this neural network to learn based upon what? It learns based on the same principle as babies learn. And that is, it notices when it is successful and when it fails. And it reinforces that part of the network that was subject to the success. And it weakens those connections in the network that experienced failure. this cat is out of the bag, if you will. There is a whole lot of research monies going into it. Neural network, artificial intelligence expertise is being hired by these companies in Silicon Valley at salaries in excess of 8 figures a year. 8 figures. That means 1,000,000,000, $10 million plus per year for a programmer. Okay. Makes you want to change professions, right? Let me learn about neural networks. This is not sufficient information for you to apply for a neural network engineer. But this idea that we have this economic engine that is driving us towards the integration of AI throughout our lives. Okay, Google? Yeah. Peanuts, right? This technology is rumbling toward us. It is said that in 10 years, the 4 million over-the-road drivers are going to be unemployed. It is said that in less than that, the 9 million data entry people are going to be unemployed. What's going to happen in our society when there is a predominance of unemployment? When our unemployment rate is going to skyrocket, 15%, 20%, 25%. They found that when that has occurred, that riots have broken out. That people want to work. Why do they want to work? When you introduce yourself to someone, what's one of the first things that comes up in your conversation? What do you do? Why? It's because we identify with what we do. We are doing beings, right? We are human doings. And the doings is what we identify with. And when we don't have the doing to identify with, we lose the rudder. We lose the ballast. We lose that which guides us through our days. And what comes out of that? Social unrest. You know, we hear about, and I just saw an article yesterday or the day before, and I don't know how true it is, but it's something that I suspect to be true. It's something that's been reported in some credible news outlets. And that Carl Icahn had recently sold off a bunch of shares in steel stocks. Turns out that coincidentally, that occurred before the tariffs were announced. And it's estimated that Carl Icahn profited in the neighborhood of tens of millions of dollars from being able to sell high. Now, if that is true, and if that is common, then what we're going to see is we're going to see the response to the social outcry to be something on the order of let them eat cake. When did that last occur, right? What happened when that response was offered by royalty on the outcry of the masses? Heads rolled. Now, I can see how there will be people who will surround themselves with security detail. I can see how they're going to have to live behind 30-foot walls, impenetrable gates, security all around. I could see that. And I can see how they would find that to be necessary. But I ask the question, what would it be like to live in a prison like that, even if Behind those walls are all of the amenities that you could hope for. What would that be like to live in a prison, even if that prison included a 300-foot yacht, if that prison included a supersonic passenger jet? I just can't imagine that. But what is the rest of society going to be like? Now, this is not to infer or to stimulate fear. I'm not about stimulating fear, but I am about preparing ourselves for the circumstance when that may in fact be the case. And the trajectory right now is in that direction. What do we do about that? How do we handle that? Where do we go with that? As we look at the social impact we see, for instance, in the medical field. My son-in-law is considering going into radiology. And one of the things about, he's looking at radiology and then a radiologist. The radiology technician would be the one that, sets you up in front of the x-ray and, arranges you so that you are exposing the vital organs appropriately, takes the picture, analyzes the picture to see if it's clear, and then he passes the image on to the radiologist. The radiologist is the one that interprets it. Well, it turns out that the radiologists now are also going to be out of a job because AI and these neural networks have all of these images that they can look at and compare the images to the known outcomes, right? So we've got, across our society, we have these various things that are happening where people are not going to be needed in the economic sphere. Patrick, could you offer that video to us? This is a doctor. Yeah. Good, we've got sound today. Excellent.
I have a patient coming in with green liners. They want to look in the eyes and they can trust this person with their eye. I'm not horribly concerned about anything. But part of that is because I have confidence in you. This procedure we're doing today, 20 years ago, was essentially impossible.
Can you all hear that?
Any more difficult? No. So the coil barely right now. It's just a feather holding it in. It's a nervous sign. It is in purgatory. It's an actual humanistic purgatory. The AI might know exactly what to do there. We got the coil in the aneurysm, but it wasn't doing tremendously well, and I knew it was staying. So with a maybe 20% risk of a very bad situation, I elected to just rear back. Because of my relationship with her and knowing the difficulties of coming in and having the procedure, I considered I should only consider the safest possible route to achieve success. But I understand that for 10 minutes agonizing about it. The computer feels nothing. The computer just does what it's supposed to do, better and better. I want to be AI in this case. teaching can be compassionate and loving in that way.
There it is.
Part of me doesn't believe in that, but
So, that's the big question. Can AI be compassionate? And if it can be, then what's to stop this becoming an AI-based society? Can it be compassionate? Can it learn from its successes and failures in compassion? And can it learn to be charmed by the cats in YouTube? Can it learn to be concerned about its effect on the subjects of its actions? Wow. Some would say, well, yeah, it probably can. Some would say, well, no, that's beyond the purview of these neural networks. Well, I'm not so sure. But how do we respond? This is coming in some form or another, in some degree or another. This is coming. How do we, as individuals, live in this environment? How do we thrive in this environment? Some politicians are now talking about a universal basic income because there is going to be such displacement. There's going to be such a large number of people that are going to be systemically out of work, unable to penetrate anything other than the very, very low-paying jobs. And in order to allow the social fabric not to be torn asunder, they're talking about universal basic income as a means of helping people survive. But surviving is not thriving. And how do we thrive? We thrive based upon our feeling of fulfillment. We thrive based upon our sense of contribution and of purpose. We thrive because we feel we are needed. But if we don't have work to do, if we don't have a vocational purpose, then we have to step back and say, all right, what are our alternatives? How do we engage purpose without having a job description, right? How do we engage purpose without having this goal, this task that I have to get done? How do we engage purpose without having someone giving us a 6-month evaluation and either a raise and promotion or a raise or no raise or just sayonara? It's said that Elon Musk, who's a major proponent of the control of artificial intelligence, it's said that he once was approached by his administrative assistant for a raise. She had been working for him for 12 years. She was wanting a raise. She approached him, said, I've been with you 12 years and I've done this, I've done that. I'd like a raise. He said, I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you 2 weeks off and I'm going to do your job myself, along with all the other stuff. And if after the 2 weeks I come to the conclusion that you're really not contributing to my overall productivity, then I will have to just let you go. But if you are, then I'll give you a raise. She went off for 2 weeks. She came back. Turns out Elon was doing just fine without her. He offered another job within the company. But she was so struck by that lack of confirmation of her purpose that she left the company. She never returned, even though she was offered an alternative employment. That kind of identity that we hold for the things that we do is very powerful. How do we substitute in a no-work environment, in a no-work social fabric, how do we substitute purpose in our lives? Now we're getting to the spiritual part. You ready? Okay, we're gonna step into the spiritual part now. Okay. So, no, that's not. Oh, you didn't reload B. Yeah, let me just. I'm fine. Yeah. Jesus offered us the two great commandments, right? The two great commandments are love God with all your heart, love your neighbor as yourself. Now, we think of that as, we often think of that as, well, I need to love God with all my heart for me, and I need to love my neighbor as myself for them. But let's flip that around a little bit. Let's flip it around to love God with all my heart for them and love my neighbor as myself for me. This may in fact be what Jesus had in mind when he offered the two great commandments. When he was asked by the Pharisees, Jesus, you're a great teacher, tell us, what are the two greatest commandments? And the reference would have been back to those 10 commandments that Moses offered. But Jesus offered this: love God with all your heart, love your neighbor as yourself. And if you are in the process of loving God with all your heart and loving your neighbor as yourself, it's not about what effect do I have on my neighbors when I love them as myself, but what effect do I have on me? One of the things about AI is that one of the branches of research is for the use of AI in companion androids. People that can carry on a conversation. I know you had some other thing in mind, but androids that can carry on a conversation with you. Androids that can relate to your experience. Androids that are able to offer an interaction that is fulfilling, an interaction that is meaty, an interaction that means something. Well, it turns out that the research is now at the point where they have put into this neural network the ability to recognize feelings based upon facial expressions. And facial expressions, you know, you think about, well, the smile and then the frown and then the quizzical look and, you know, one eyebrow raised and the other lowered. Those are certainly valid expressions. But there's also the micro muscle work in facial expressions, where people who can read facial expressions very well and know exactly what you're feeling, what they're doing is they're sensing the little twitch of the muscle right under the right eye, or the stretch of the brow that is a little bit more defined than otherwise. So these micro motions have not yet been identified in these neural networks. But that's just a matter of time. That's just a matter of refinement. So what we're talking about are companions that are going to be able to sit with the elderly. You know, one of the things that we're finding as we work with the elderly is that the people who are in these elder care facilities have very few contacts with their families. What a sad situation that is. I was working with my mom. She was suffering from shingles, and during the last 6 months of her life she was going through this, and she was located in an elder care facility rather than her own apartment. And the nursing staff commented to me one day about how impressed they were that I came over 3 times a week to visit my mom. And, you know, for me, 3 times a week, I felt guilty that I wasn't there every day, right? But they were impressed because I was there 3 times a week to visit my parents. And they said that typically the patients don't have that kind of interaction. So these androids, these companion androids that can relate to your own life experience and talk to you about, things that happened when you were a kid. And that, of course, it's going to have to be input, but that's just a matter of history, right? So these androids are going to be able to talk with the elderly, with the kids, with the mentally challenged, and provide a sense of fulfillment to them. I can just imagine that when I have been relegated to an elder care facility over my extreme objections, but when I am relegated to an elder care facility, that a companion I can see would be very, very useful to keep me fresh, to keep my brain working. Well, so love God with all your heart, love your neighbor as yourself, even this android. Not because the android is going to benefit from it, but because I'm going to benefit from it. The love that I give is going to be my experience of love. If I withhold love, I will not experience it. We think about unconditional love coming from God. That only helps us if we allow that unconditional love to flow through us. If that unconditional love is expressed, then we are lifted, then we are transformed, then we are healed. Not because I have loved that guy, or I've loved that girl, or I've loved that robot. Only if it flows through us are we lifted, are we transformed. And that's an interesting lesson that we can apply. Love God with all your heart, love your neighbor as yourself, not because that's going to affect that out there, but because it affects us. So be selfish. Love God with all your heart. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love because that is what brings you joy. Not about what you do. It's not about who you know. It's not about how many trinkets you have. It's not about how big your bank account is. It's about how much you love. Unconditionally. We'll have our meditation. As we come into our meditation, let us, as we settle into this moment, as we allow all of those cares and concerns to be let go, released, as we rest in this pure moment of being, how does that feel? What is that like to be just here now? Without the incursion of the past or without the concern for the future. What is it like to be purely here now? Resting in this moment without identity, without the thought of differences, without judgment. What's that like? What's that feel like? In this state of pure being, is there a sense of unconditional love that is flowing into you? Is there the sense of opportunity for this unconditional love to flow through you into this moment? What does that feel like to let the love flow through you? Without allocation, without limitation. Just let it be into this moment. Let it touch everyone. Do not withhold it from anyone. Let it be given fully. Let it be given without expectation of recognition or return. Let it flow. As we meditate upon this flow of unconditional love, let us notice how it changes our countenance, how it changes our brain pattern, how it changes our thoughts. Let us notice how it erases, dissolves the judgments that we hold. Judgments for others and judgments for ourselves. Feel this purifying elixir moving through our whole being, illuminating the dark corners, washing away the fears, and acknowledge also that this experience was initiated merely by choosing it. Nothing else mattered but our choice. And in that recognition, we celebrate. We acknowledge that we are the masters of our journey. We are the captains of our ship. And in that gratitude, let us come back to this time and space, sharing the words of the Lord's Prayer.